Emily. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Gosh, okay, so I have spoken on many, many episodes here and there about postpartum depression and kind of all of that, like realizing um, after my diagnosis, looking back at like certain times of my life with this new lens, and it's been really, really eye-opening. And one of the biggest times has been dealing with babies.
Oh God,
I'm
yeah.
really right, and actually not talking that much about pregnancy too. So I'm really, really excited. I got a lot of questions about kind of the perinatal and postpartum. But I want to hear your diagnosis story first. So, how long ago were you diagnosed, and what was going on in your life at that time that led you to put two and two together?
My diagnosis story has two parts actually. I was born in the very early 80s, and so I grew up, going to school and like the kids that were in the special ed classroom, that was a separate classroom, and it was like a whole, right? And now we don't do that because we realize that that's absurd and that's not how life is. But I was diagnosed when I was 8, and I didn't know that that's what was
Nobody
happening.
told you. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and I wasn't medicated, and I didn't I didn't get any accommodations or anything like that, because I think like my parents were really worried about like the stigma that was
Yeah.
going to go with that. So at some point they started telling me like that I needed to take my time with tests. Like, take your time, don't work too fast, check your answers. That was it. I was very hyperactive. Like, I know I was diagnosed young because there was no masking the hyperactivity. Like, I wasn't inattentive and daydreamy. I was like covered in dirt and running around with the boys who were also hyperactive. But I was never medicated, and I was also at the point at which I was sort of like being told that this this was a thing, or that, like, sometimes you move too quickly and you need to slow yourself down. I was told that I would outgrow it.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know if anyone else that like was diagnosed in the 80s with any sort of like learning neurospicy anything was told they would outgrow it, because like no adult has ADHD, right? Like, no
Yeah, that was the
adult.
standard understand. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the clinical understanding of ADHD back then. Was that you outgrew it?
Exactly. Exactly. So I went to college and was like, these textbooks are really hard to read. And so at that point, my mom was like, let's see if you still have ADHD. And I was like, see if I what the what?
So,
Oh,
so wait, just to backtrack a little bit. So, was it your teacher who suggested it, or like, did you go through a formal diagnosis process, or was it the pediatrician who was just sort of like, yeah?
I
Do you
did
remember any
go
of that?
through I did go through a very formal diagnosis process. Like, it was like a lot of like a whole day of like almost play therapy, where they were like analyzing how I play and like
Yeah,
watching how fast I jumped from thing to thing.
but you don't know. You're
Um,
8, right? You're
right.
probably
Like,
just
I,
like,
I just thought we were hanging out.
yeah.
Um,
Okay, that's all. I just wanted to know if it was just sort of like your teacher had said, like, yeah, she's got ADHD, or was it more, wasn't, did they actually go through all of that? And
I think the teachers probably were like, there's something happening here. And my parents were like, because my younger brother also has ADHD, but his is inattentive. And so like he's better at hiding it than I am.
oh,
Um, so like they were comparing these two kids and being like, there's a 5-year age gap, but like developmentally sometimes they act like they're in the same place. Like, I was 5 years older, but I was so impulsive and so hyperactive that like there were differences there, or
Interesting. Okay.
similarities there, I guess.
Okay, so let's
Um,
fast forward to college.
yeah, yeah. So then, I get on medication. Yes, you didn't outgrow your ADHD. Surprise, surprise. Um,
Also, you have it.
right, like this is your life now.
Yeah.
Although that realization comes way later. We'll get there. Um, so at that point, it was like all about testing and grades and doing well in school. And so when I then graduated and was working, I didn't need it. I didn't need medication. I didn't need, anything other than like sort of the learned accommodations that I had like taught myself over the course of my life. Like keeping a calendar with me, instead of leaving it at home and on a wall, because I'm never going to remember what I'm doing next Thursday if someone asks me if I'm available.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have to have it with me. Um, so then I meet my husband. He says he has ADHD, and I'm like, we should totally have kids, like a bunch of them. This will be really fun. And I don't know how many folks who have been on this have said this, but like, we're not always great at birth control, the ADHD folks. Because like impulsivity is like a thing.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Like,
I don't know if I've actually talked about that. That was certainly an issue with me in my younger days.
two of my kids
Yeah.
were not planned because I was
Yeah.
non-compliant with my birth control, basically.
Well, I mean, even when you are, even if you're on something that's like the pill, we all forget to take it too. So there were so
Oh,
many
God,
times
yeah.
where I would be like, I'm 3 days behind. Maybe I'll just pop all three at the same time because I'm an idiot. Like, those moments, right? Where you're like, nobody needs to
Absolutely.
know. Yeah.
Like, it's fine. I can totally. No, that's not how that works. You did not read the label. So yeah, so I at that point, I still had the narrative that I had outgrown it, that like it was about being in school, right?
Mhm.
And it was all about academic success, and that was when it got in the way, and that was the only way that it got in the way for me. Um, After my first kid, I had anxiety, depression, and OCD that was untreated. In long story short, too late. But the version of that I think is like important to note is anyone in the perinatal period can come up with reasons for why they feel the way they feel. Like, I have a new baby. The birth was harder than I expected, not what I pictured. Breastfeeding was easy, hard. There are so many moving parts to adjusting to having an infant in your house that it's impossible to, if you want to tell yourself a story, I should say, about why you feel anxious or depressed, or why you for me, my OCD was always about like catastrophic thinking and sort of thinking over and over through negative things that weren't likely to happen at all. But I didn't embrace the reality that I was anxious or depressed or had OCD until the second kid was born, and I still felt the same way. And so at that point, I went to my midwives. I got on medication. Started seeing a therapist. I started like doing the work that I needed to do to sort of like be a good mom. And at some point, because what they tend to prescribe Zoloft because it's like the most tested. It's tested on the most
Breastfeeding too,
right,
right?
the
Yeah.
most age groups. It's safe in kids. It's safe for breastfeeding. And they haven't tested some of the other SSRIs, so that was the only option. At one point, I essentially needed to graduate from seeing my midwives because they were like, if the medication that you're on isn't solving how you feel, then we're going to send you to like, we trust her. She's lovely. She's going to take great care of you. We're sending you to our specialist. I'm like, okay. So I get in there and I'm ready to talk about the fact that, like, maybe I need different medication, maybe, you know, like, because at that point I was no longer depressed. I was anxious and prone to overwhelm. Like, I would get rage angry over, like, normal things that babies and toddlers do, that in hindsight was so obviously because it had taken me all of my mental and emotional energy to self-motivate, to do a task, and I was trying to focus on completing that task. And when their attention, or when they drew my attention away from completing that task, the frustration came out as rage. Which makes perfect sense to today me, but then me thought I was a monster.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've often talked about the fact that I felt like a lot of my postpartum depression, because I was same diagnosed with postpartum depression and anxiety. The catastrophic thinking was, I only have two kids, but it was so much worse with my second. And so I feel like, is that a regular experience or is that a typical? Because I feel like I just knew so much more about all the things that could go wrong with kids, whereas I felt so naive with my first one. And so it was so much worse with my second. But anyway, I've often felt like the depression side wasn't necessarily what was being asked of me when I would go to the doctor's office, in terms of, like, you know, thoughts of being unalive or unaliving my children, but it was the what is wrong with me feeling, right? That question that so many of us had, which is like, why am I in a rage all the time? Why is my husband walking around on eggshells, right? Like that question of, like, why am I behaving the way I am behaving? It feels like I'm out of control. And that's where I think the depression came from. It wasn't, and so anyway.
I agree.
Isn't that interesting, right?
And I think, in my non-clinical observation, it seems like women and birthing people who have ADHD, who add one kid to the mix, there's an adjustment period. And then you add a second kid to the mix, and all you're doing is adding a second set of needs that you're trying to navigate in addition to your own. Which, let's face it, for those of us with ADHD, is already very hard to do. Like, am I remembering to eat? Am I remembering to drink water? Did I remember to exercise? All of that is just really, really, really hard when it's just you and your brain, let alone the needs of any additional humans in your house. That's my theory.
Whew. Okay, so and now you have 3 kids too, right?
I do. Yeah.
So then, okay, so let's keep going.
Yeah, so after the third one, my midwives were like, you need more help than we can provide you. We're sending you somewhere. We're going to send you to our person. And our person is still my person to this day. She is lovely. She manages kids and adolescents with ADHD and women in the perinatal period. And I'm like, can we talk more about that? Like, how much overlap is there? So I walk into the appointment and I'm like ready to talk about the things that I am feeling overwhelmed about, like the things that I'm struggling to stay ahead of in my life. And I'm like, I don't know, 5-10 minutes in, and I've already jumped subjects like 3, 4, 5 times. Like, I'm like all over the place.
Yeah.
And she's like, have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD? And it was like record scratch. Yeah. When I was 8, I outgrew it. And she's like, that's not a thing.
Well, I totally
like,
understand that idea where you're like, no, that's a school thing, right? Like, why would this relate to my relationship with my spouse or my children or any of that stuff, right? It's not in the DSM. It's not, nobody talks about it. So,
because how do you measure your relationship to your spouse? Like, that's what the DSM is telling us, right? Like, it's like saying, how pervasive it is in getting in the way of academics or whatever. And it's like it gets in the way socially.
Yeah.
I cannot stress that enough. Like whenever I'm talking to friends who are like, should I take my kid? Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do it. Because if they're not struggling academically because they're gifted, they're probably struggling socially.
Yeah. Such a good point, right? You think about the self-talk. I mean, that's what we all are hugely affected by in adulthood. It's the self-concept that comes from all of this sort of confusion and frustration. It's not like, I think I have an attention deficit. Like I don't, what does that even mean, right? Especially when it's like coming to understanding your relationship with your children or sensory stuff. Yeah. Whew.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So, she suggested that this could all be ADHD related. Record scratch.
Like, right. She's like, we can treat your anxiety and your rage and your overwhelm, but if we aren't also treating your ADHD, and I was like, okay. So I went back on Adderall. Per my college experience, I knew that it worked well, and she's like, they have this thing called extended release now. And I was like, tell me more. Oh my God, my life has changed. Like, it was amazing. So the realization that I have daily now is if I wake up and I'm anxious and I take my ADD meds, I'm not anxious. Like,
interesting.
My anxiety is how I mask my difficulty staying on top of tasks, remembering what I have to do each day. Because it's like the back of my mind is going, you're going to forget something, you're going to forget something. Yeah, probably, because I have ADHD. But if I take my meds, I don't forget things the way that I do. Like before I was medicated. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that is so important. I feel like I wish doctors and even therapists could make that connection, because a lot of the time, like Xanax doesn't, I don't know if you've ever tried it. It doesn't do anything, right? So it's like it's coming down to like looking at the connections between the why, right? The why we're behaving this way, which is something that I talk about ad nauseum on this podcast, which is like, looking at, the fact that we use anxiety. Anxiety becomes very useful for us in terms of motivating us to do things. And so it's not necessarily this thing that just exists that we caught like the flu. It's something that we have developed or has developed as a result of all of these coping mechanisms that we've had. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, so well said. Exactly. And your kids are really close together too, right?
Yeah, so it's like I was on the New Every Two plan, cell phones.
Oh my God, I've never heard that before. I love it.
For real.
And how old are they now?
Okay, 15, 13,
is your oldest?
And 11.
Wow. Okay.
So I now don't have any elementary schoolers. This will be my first year without anyone in elementary school.
And they all get on the early bus now? That was like the life changing. When everybody left my house at 7 a.m., it was such a life change. It was so great.
It's like I could Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music, just like stand at the top of the hill and sing. I'm tone deaf, but I would sing anyway, But being able to start my day that early is tremendous.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember so my kids are almost 5 years apart. They're 4.5 years apart. And I remember friends of mine when my oldest was like a year, 18 months, all were starting again for their second one. And my husband and I were like, no, absolutely not. We could not possibly bring a baby into this chaotic situation. We were like, no. And then when we were ready to try, because we sort of had arbitrarily decided 4 years was a good time to have our kids apart. And
isn't that funny? We all do that though.
Right? Well, my
This is
brother and
a
I were
good
4 years apart, so it was like that's what I knew, right? It's like folding socks. You do exactly what your parents did because that's all you know.
Yep.
But that was really the first time where we felt like we could even try to have another baby because I struggled so much the first time around. We both did.
Yeah.
But then we looked at my daughter who was like potty trained and sitting quietly on a Sunday morning while we read the newspaper, and then we were like, no, we can't bring a baby into this situation. It's too good now. We like missed our window.
Right.
So I get why parents want to just kind of like rip the band-aid off and get it all done and while just be in the crazy while you're in the crazy.
Yes.
But how do you even decide? Like, it just feels like there's so much chaos, right? You're pregnant, so you're going through all the pregnancy stuff. But you still have this baby waking you up all the time. And I mean, the exhaustion, all of that. Anyway, I guess my question was, did you feel like can you like discern for yourself what was ADHD in terms of pregnancy versus postpartum, right? Because perinatal is really the whole shebang, right? It's from the moment of conception until like a year officially postpartum?
A year or two postpartum. So there are folks who get diagnosed when their kid is 18 months old, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and they're like, I'm really depressed. I'm really anxious. I'm, insert symptoms here. And it's like, yeah, it can still, like, if you don't resolve it, it's going to stick around, right? Like.
Well, if anything, I feel like that's the moment where, because I was diagnosed when my daughter was 18 months, because I had gotten to that point where I'm like, okay, I'm sleeping better. Things are still not better, right? Like there's always that wait and see feeling where you're like, right?
18 months old. Yes.
Yeah. And so there's that wait and see where it's like, things are going to get better. Things are going to get better. Everybody says things are going to get better. And it's like something happens at 18 months where you're like, yeah, things have not gotten better. So therefore I need help.
Yes.
So I imagine a lot of women wait a long time to feel like and
also, like, I mean, if someone is breastfeeding or chest feeding, right, I have to be really careful about what I'm eating, what I'm putting in my body, like what medications am I taking, is it being passed to the baby? Like there are so many things that I think even if someone had said to me, hey, your ADHD is part of what's happening right now, and if you can get that under control, like this whole parenting the babies and toddlers is going to be way easier. I don't know that I would have been open to taking medication because I didn't know what the consequences would be.
Mm-hmm. I had a lot of my anxiety was wrapped around medication as well. I did not even Zoloft, which has been studied tremendously, like you said, I did not want to nurse and take SSRIs at the same time. And so that was my anxiety, which was like, I will never forgive myself if a study comes out in 30 years that, all of that stuff. And so I think we're very prone to that, like wanting to do everything as perfectly as possible so that we're not blamed somehow.
We learned that perfection masking our ADD as a kid.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally.
And so if we have to do things perfect, we have kids, which we are told is like, then you've arrived. You've arrived as an adult. Like, this is your purpose in life, right? Like, you are now finding greater meaning. You're connected to everything. It all makes sense now. None of it makes sense. Like, it's not easier. It's not, like, having kids didn't provide answers. It didn't make me more patient. It didn't make me calmer. It just made who I was, like, more people were in the house with me while I was still not patient, not medicated for ADD, not, like, I don't know, not reflecting on what I really needed.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I feel like one of the things I feel like must be very common amongst women with ADHD or neurodivergent mothers who are undiagnosed is that feeling of like things didn't go according to plan, right? The perfectionism. So it's like I really really struggled with like the fact that I had an epidural with my first baby because I
Oh
had this
God,
birth
yeah.
plan, right? And so I felt like I had cheated somehow. Like, and I would tell people this. I would tell people about the amount of like issues and struggle I would have letting go of my birth plan gone awry. And there were so many
Same.
people, right, who were like, it's fine, whatever, you have your baby at the end. And I was like, I see that in theory. Why can't I let go of the fact that I had this? And I still, like, to this day, I'm like, I can't really put my finger on like why it was so important.
Okay,
And
for your second, did
oh,
you
yeah,
not
no, of course not. Well, because the
did you
epidural,
not need the epidural
I
for the
didn't need it.
second one?
He came like sliding out of me so quickly that I didn't need it. But at that point, at least I was okay with the epidural because I had it and I had a really good experience with it. So I was like, I felt like the person at the back of the class who's like, I would always tell new moms, be like, just get the epidural. It's totally fine. It's not a big deal.
Gonna be
Natural,
fine.
right? Like, don't put all this pressure on yourself to have a natural birth.
My first
And
one was a C-section.
yeah,
Unplanned, and so
yeah.
I had a lot of
So
guilt,
much trauma
exactly like
around
what
that,
you're
yeah.
saying. Trauma, guilt, the whole thing. Second one, VBAC with an epidural. I was like, I was so close to doing it right. Doing it right. What does that even mean? That is
Right?
that is just absurd.
Yeah.
But man, that narrative was really strong. Third one, no medication.
I didn't have time.
Turns out it didn't make me. Again, I was waiting for something to make me more patient, more less ADHD, I think. And no birth experience, no unfussy baby, no what, like none of that is going to create a different me.
Yeah. Oh my God. So, God, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about how that feeling of like, if I do everything right, then somehow I won't be the one who's blamed at the end, right? Or
Yes.
I won't be culpable for anything that goes wrong. And I'm like, now looking at that idea and that motherhood thought and philosophy is so clearly ADHD, right? It's so clearly this product of the way in which we are spoken to and then internalize this idea that
Yes.
like I've missed something, right? Or I have to like double, triple, quadruple check everything. And do you think that's why we like obsessively research parenthood? Because I feel like that was, I don't know about you, but I read every single book I could possibly read,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was very frustrated that my husband was like, we'll be fine, right? He was like
Right?
so didn't care, and I was like, no, we have to be perfect at this.
Yeah, parenting is a game, and I am going to win it. I don't know who I'm playing against. I have no idea, but I'm gonna win at it. You know, like, yeah, the amount of harm I did to myself talking that way about what I should have been capable of or expect of myself. Like in hindsight, like dear earlier Emily, I am sorry. Today me knows now that that was not very nice. Like I did not need to do that to myself.
I'm getting emotional. I'm getting so emotional. I feel like I want to write that woman a letter, right? I do. Right. When we talk about the grief of a diagnosis and just that, oh God, it's so, yeah, I really, really just want to give that version of myself a hug because it was so hard. And I really never felt like everybody's like, yeah, motherhood's hard, right? But I was like, this feels really like a lot.
Really a lot. Really, really. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's tied into your whole being. Oh my goodness. Whew. Emily, you're making me cry too early in the day.
Sorry. In prep for this interview,
Yeah.
like was talking to a friend and cried on the phone.
Right?
So I got mine out like just right before we started.
So
And I am not a crier.
I know. Well, I
usually.
always joke about because I'm on an SSRI, so I'm like, I don't cry on an SSRI. I'm dead inside. So when I do cry, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so wait, so I want to ask you about the climb out of the darkness. So you went to one,
Yes.
right? You went to an event as a mother.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm, this I became a parent during the mommy blogging boom. Everyone had a mommy blog. I had one. The people I would meet at mom's group had them. No one had any followers. We were literally just following each
But it
other.
was
And
also Facebook. I feel like our generation was like the Facebook parents too, which had
yeah, that was how we
group.
connected.
Yeah, yeah. It was.
Yeah.
I feel like it was very wonderful, but also a lot. I felt like it fed a lot of our "Am I normal?" anxiety in a way that maybe it
Yes.
wasn't so healthy. But anyway.
I agree. I agree. The one thing about blogging that was really good for me was I was doing a lot of like self-reflecting every day in real time. And I wasn't pulling any punches in terms of like the parts of parenthood that I did not like or that were hard. I never really liked being pregnant. I it was easy enough, like I was fortunate to have easy pregnancies, but I didn't like the feeling of being pregnant. It was uncomfortable, which is, I think, a neurodivergent thing too, for sure.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I will say one of the things I liked about being pregnant was the permission to like be fat and eat whatever I wanted because I had such a
oh yeah,
disordered relationship with food in my body. That was the only thing I liked about it.
yeah. Like you're
But yeah,
telling me my ADHD binge eating is now allowed? Great. I'm
right.
gonna double down on that. Like for sure, for sure. Oh God, where was I going with that?
Okay, so we were talking about what led up to you attending your first Climb Out of the
Yeah,
Darkness
okay.
event.
So I'm blogging, other people are blogging. I'm following a blogger who's kind of big in the blog sphere, and she's talking about how she just got diagnosed with postpartum anxiety. And I'm like, okay, here we go. Hyper focus, buckle up. We're going to just research the crap out of this. So in the course of reading about postpartum anxiety, which resonated a lot with me, I found this Climb Out of the Darkness event that was happening like in several places, but it was its first year. It was like a brand new baby
Oh,
fundraiser awareness raising thing. And I put all three of my kids in the car and I drove, like I live outside of Baltimore. I drove down into Baltimore. I had never been there before and I have anxiety about like following directions and I had to like print them on MapQuest, because that's when this was. Um like I'm like, ugh, am I gonna get there? I don't know. Like I had the roadmap like opened up and like I mean it was, this was like 11 years ago. And I was a Luddite when it came to like adopting technology because I
you
was cheap.
and like
So
three kids in car seats in the back seat too,
right,
right? Yeah.
right. Three kids in car seats, me with like printed out directions. I'm driving. I get there. I don't know anyone. I'm an extrovert. So I'm going to lean in on just meeting people when I get there, which was fine. I wasn't necessarily like anxious about that. But I was like, what are we going to talk about? Like, is everyone that's there going to be like, I'm depressed. I don't like my baby. No, breadth of experience, like I when I say it felt like coming home, it really did. Like people were like, parenting is hard. Some people were like, I'm very anxious about specific things. Like I'm, you know, carrying the baby. I'm, what if I drop the baby? What if I trip? Like the things that you worry about, we were worrying about them out loud and not keeping quiet anymore.
Mm.
And I was like, this is my life now. I do this.
When you wrote to me and said that you had attended a Climb Out of the Darkness event and now you're the director, I was like, that feels very ADHD, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I attended, and then I attended the next year, and then I co-led the like Baltimore climb event for 2 years with a dear friend Hi, Carrie. Um, and then I sent an email to the like head of the organization, and I was like, I have some ideas about like increasing sort of like uh, equity across, like, because as someone who lives in the Northeast, for both of us, like fundraising looks different here than it looks if you go, I don't know, 50 miles west in either of our states,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you get to a smaller town, if you get to a place where like the businesses are mom and pop businesses, like all of that looks different. And I was watching people who I had become really close to lead events in other parts of the country. And I was like, I want them to feel the success that I feel, because what they're doing is successful. They're raising awareness, they're, telling local businesses, local mom groups, local libraries, whatever, about this event and about the resources and all of that. But like they're not they're not feeling the success that I'm feeling, because we're only measuring it based on dollars raised. We need to measure it based on different things. So I send this email to the person who's running the climb, and she's like, "Would you like a job?" And I was like, "Well, I just won the lottery. This is amazing."
Wow.
Um, and so I've been running the program since 2017, which for an adult with ADHD is a really long time to work in the same job, because I was a job jumper before that. Like I would do something and do it really, really well for like a year or two, and then would need, like, I would feel the wanderlust and need to like do something different.
Hmm.
And I do not feel that at all in this job, because it's like it's new and it's different. And at first I was, the person who was running the fundraisers for this organization, and then I was like, we should really start a podcast. And so, because I'm the I say things out loud, I blurt my ideas, they just come out, and sometimes they land and people are like, yeah, you should do that. And so um yeah, like ADHD is my superpower now. Like I don't feel like any part of it really is a problem. It's more like, what else is happening for me in my day that this is showing up as a problem. It's not that the ADHD, which is inherently a part of who I am, is the problem. It's like, what else overwhelmed you today? Like, did you not drink enough water? Did you move your body? Like, I no longer blame myself for the things. And I get to be creative, and I get to help people, and like, won the lottery. I sent an email, I had some ideas, I won the lottery.
Amazing.
And now I work for Postpartum Support International, and I get to talk to people and hear their stories, and like hold space for them, and help them make differences in their community. And it's so cool.
I hear you. I mean, I think the thing with the podcast too is this ability to, like, when I started this podcast, it was so selfish. It was really like, I want to meet other women who maybe went through the same experience as me, right?
Yeah.
And know that I'm not alone. But it was so cathartic to meet new women and to have these conversations, and it was so much for me. And so then I would turn around and be like, oh, other women are benefiting from hearing, like, it was such this win-win situation. I really felt like, oh my God, this is amazing, because there's so much healing involved in telling your story, and there's so much healing involved in listening to the other person's story. Like, it's so symbiotic in all the right ways. But really, when it
Absolutely.
comes to like reducing stigma and getting to that place that you're talking about, that I am not the issue here. I am amazing. I am phenomenal. I am eccentric.
Yes.
Right? It's
Yes.
just a matter of like what is in my environment right now that is leading me to struggle or be stuck or whatever. But like that
Yes.
level of self-acceptance that none of us experienced, usually before this diagnosis, or in your case over and over and over again. Like, I've talked to women who were diagnosed in childhood and still experience this, right? Because of how we're spoken to, or the expectations, or the country we're living, like all of those things, how we're
Yeah.
socialized, all of that. But this idea that like talking about and sharing our stories is so healing, in terms of reducing that stigma that we've been left with. So yeah,
Yes.
it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean you've created this community, right? Like where it's parasocial. We don't all know you in real life. We aren't having coffee with you, but we do have this sense that like that you get us. And
That
that's
feeling, like you said, like I'm home, right? That finding our
yes.
people. Yeah.
Yes. Like feeling like you're part of a community is so important. Is so important. And I think and maybe again this is, how women are socialized, but I think that women thrive in community in a way it's like magical. Like
You're
we
giving me all
we
the feels today. I'm like
sorry.
so it is so magical. And one of the things, I love interviewing experts, it's great. I love learning about ADHD, but for me the magic is when somebody listens to this podcast and then they turn around and say it's time for me to share my story, because
Yes.
these women's stories have helped me so much. I want to share my experience so that I can help other women, but also realizing that sharing your experience in itself is so healing. Oh God.
Yes.
Oh, it's so
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean honestly, like every episode of your pod that I've listened to so far, even if the subject title sounds like it might not really relate, I'm like sitting there like, "Yes!" every time. At there and it's not just one or two little gems. Like there's plenty to take away because that's what community does. Like it allows us to see how much more we have in common than we might think at face value.
Mm, yeah. Aw. It's lovely. Okay.
Deep breath.
I know, right? I want to ask you about your kids too, but I'm also like still processing all of this. But
Sorry.
no, I know, right? No, this is really good. I'm really grateful to be having this conversation with you. I feel like you really have a gift for articulating these experiences. So thank you.
Thank you.
But I want to, how many of your kids have been diagnosed? What was that situation like with you going back? Because both you and your husband had it. So you knew,
Right.
how, because a lot of the time I talk about like how, for me, my kids were diagnosed after me. And so my parenting changed drastically after my diagnosis when I saw in them how I was perpetuating a lot of that negativity around their
Right.
behaviors. And so
Like
I'm
the
so
sitting
grateful,
still or
right?
yeah.
Behave, right? Be a good kid, do all the things. And so I'm so grateful that my awareness has helped me as a parent. And so
Absolutely.
I'm curious, like, what was your journey with your three kids?
Uh Basically like once each of them entered third grade, so 8 years old,
Third grade, yeah.
that's where there's an expectation of self-control for good or ill that my kids all struggled with. And they each struggled in different ways. One of them would get rage frustrated, and I'm like, relatable. I get it. I can help. One of them is like a mirror in terms of hyperactivity, a very sobering mirror. Like Oh my goodness.
This is
I'm
karmic
like,
retribution.
yeah. I'm like, listen, I understand that you really want to like clap or like hoot and holler, but I'm overwhelmed when you do it. Where can you do it and how can you do it so that I am not overwhelmed? Like, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying go outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please go outside. It's really loud in here right now.
Right. And then
Yeah.
you think about all of our parents who literally said, like my mom, who was literally like, go outside and don't come back until the street lights turn on. That was what she used to say to us at the summer.
Right. Right. And you're like, okay.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we went out and got into all kinds of cool shenanigans. played with sticks and mud and stuff. It was great. Yeah, my youngest is a girl, my older two are boys. Only one I think is a hyperactive type, but the diagnosis was actually really easy. I went in, I met with the first one. She like, you know, watched the oldest and within like 30 minutes was like, yeah, inattentive probably. Like he's got whole things happening in his brain that he's not sharing out loud. Second one, sharing everything out loud. Nothing stayed in his brain. By the time we got to the third one, I was like, hey, I think the third one. And she's like, I'll just write you a prescription. It's fine.
You're the expert now, right?
Right. And I mean, you know, the Adderall shortage is frustrating, but you know, we've been able to pivot. Like some of us have switched to other medication options. We don't medicate during the summer because they don't have anywhere that they need to go or anything that they need to do where a level of self-control is required. And most of their friends are, if not neurodivergent, have neurodivergent siblings. So it's not like if I send a really hyperactive kid to hang out with his really hyperactive friends that the parents are going to be overwhelmed. It's like a whole new world a little bit than what I had growing up. Like, you know, I wasn't like, I gotta go and be like I gotta like try to be chill when I'm at a play date, you know, mask myself.
Yeah.
They don't do that. Like they're all just wild and crazy. And I'm like, okay, good. Like it's not just my kid that's wild and crazy. Like all of your kids are wild and crazy too, which is really validating. Like it's a judgment-free, thank you, I feel validated situation. So.
Well, and like you said, there's no sense where they have to be other than who they are, right? And so there's not that like trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. It's really like, yeah, just be your wonderful, wild, eccentric self.
Exactly.
So you had also mentioned that your brother was in attentive ADHD. Was he diagnosed in adulthood or was he diagnosed in childhood?
He was diagnosed in middle school or high school.
Huh,
like that was the point at which for him it started to present and get in the way. So he was then taking medication for a while in there, but doesn't anymore. Funny story, him and his wife lived with us during part of the pandemic for a hot minute while they were like transitioning from one house to the other. And his wife was like, I didn't realize he had ADD until there were other people in the house. Like it was like he was able to mask it when it was just him, his wife, and their first child. And then once they were in the house with us, it was like he just had a much harder time like organizing his thoughts, staying motivated, like all the things that we all struggle with. She's like, yeah, it's, and I'm like, that's true for me too. Like the more people that are in a situation, the more other people's needs come in, the harder it is for me to mask.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, that's how I ended up diagnosed, right? Because it was the pandemic and my kids and my husband were home and I could not do anything because I knew I was going to be interrupted at some point by somebody. And so, you know, and my kids would come and at lunchtime and be like, we're hungry. And I was like, I just fed you. And they're like, oh no, I didn't. Okay, fine.
Right.
But like feeling
Right.
like I was constantly being interrupted by somebody. And I was like, I'm just sitting here in waiting mode all day long, not getting anything done. And that was kind of what
Yeah,
tipped the scales. So yeah, but
exactly.
is it mass? I see, it's interesting because I feel like if your brother was in a situation where he was able to kind of be himself and have a structure with his wife and child that met like
Right.
I don't know. I feel like that's accommodating environment versus a hostile environment like school or workplace where you
Mm,
do mask. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there's ways in which if we're kind of in a situation where we are doing well, like our ADHD ebbs and flows, right? And that's where I
yeah,
get
that's
confused about
true.
like what are we talking about? Are we talking about an ADHD brain, which is something we're born with, and sometimes we're struggling and sometimes we're not based on our environment? Or do we have this wonderful neurodivergent brain and we only seem to have ADHD when we are struggling because those are the behaviors that clinicians recognize, right?
Right.
And so I don't know. I feel like it's kind of all of it, but
I
that's
wonder
a
if
whole other
some of
side
it is,
tangent.
but I think some of it though is the way that we use the word masking now.
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
masking now can mean like hiding autism spectrum disorder
Hmm.
traits, right? Um, I don't necessarily think masking is good or bad. Sometimes it's very useful. Sometimes I choose to do it on purpose. Um, it's it's more like the energy cost for me. Like the
Hmm.
energy that it takes to mask is what I would assess as positive or negative. Like if it's not, if the juice isn't worth the squeeze, you know, if it's too hard to do, then I'm either going to be depleted early in the day or I'm going to not be able to keep the mask on when I want it on. And
Hmm.
I don't think that's the mask isn't the enemy. It's the energy that it takes that can be the problem.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. And I think it's why recognizing that cycle of energy and exhaustion, once you know what's happening and why, then you're not asking the question, what's wrong with me, right? You're not saying, oh
Yes.
my goodness, I'm suddenly in a rage and yelling at my kids. You're saying, no, these are the signposts that led to this, right? The TV was on. I haven't slept. All of the things. There's too many people in the house. All of those things that lead to the inexplicable rage, you can now see why I always talk about it like it's
Yes.
like there's, notes in the margin or highway signs or whatever, like that idea that there are a lot of you can recognize those factors before you reach fever
Right.
pitch. Yeah.
Right.
Oh my goodness, Emily. Whew, thank you. This was amazing. Now, okay, I want to ask you about if you could rename ADHD to something else, what would you call it? Do you have something else you might call it? Or
Ooh.
do you like that name? I mean, it's also I've had a lot of women who are like, that's the acronym is fine because I don't even really think about what it means anymore because it's become something so separate from the name of it.
Okay. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So I think for me it's so much more about executive function than it is attention or inattention. And it's also about energy. Like how much
Mm,
energy do I have? How how much is it going to take to do something? Um yeah, it's like
mm.
executive and energy for me. Um
Yeah, that's true. And it's and again, I don't think it's a disorder.
right.
So that's a tricky one too, right? I think we get a lot of like, do we call it a syndrome or just call it, some people are like, we just call it sparkly brain, eccentric. I'm an
Yes.
eccentric. Man, that's what I would call it if I could call it something else. I'm like, it's really just all of us having our embracing our eccentricities.
I would
Um,
think that when we were living in like villages and huts that we were probably the people who were like on guard duty from saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah, of course, right?
Because
The hunters.
we like whatever's happening in the periphery, like we always have this ability to be pulled towards it.
Mm-hmm.
So like, hello, village protector, you're welcome. I don't know.
I like that. Wonderful. Okay, so the podcast is fairly new, right? You just started it earlier this year?
The podcast is new. Our first episodes aired in, I want to say, February. We dreamed of the podcast a year before that, and my coworkers, who are not neurospicy in the way that I am, they were like, let's make a whole plan before we, and I'm like, really? Like, let's just buy microphones and start recording things. And they're like, hear me out. So it took us a while to like get it launched, and now we have we finished our first season. Our second season is starting probably in a couple of weeks. We tell the stories of pregnant and postpartum people who have had some sort of diagnosis or not diagnosis. A lot of the people we talked to were never formally diagnosed, at least not in real time with anything that they were suffering from, but anything from psychosis to birth trauma to we talked to the spouses of folks who have had postpartum depression or anxiety, because there's power in storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very common occurrence. Like 1 in 5 women within the first 12 months will experience like a mental health complication. And that can be anything from anxiety, which is common, to psychosis, which is less common. They are the unicorns. Each one is unique. So we tell people stories, and we talk about like the through line, the way that you do, like what led to the diagnosis or what led to realizing you needed help, and then like what did the help look like, and what does now look like. They all want to pay it back, like because we can't go back in time and change our own history, but we can like reach back to the people that are in there now and be like, come on, there is a way forward. You're going to be okay.
Right. I felt like that, why so many of us turn to advocacy is that idea of like, if I could save one woman from going through what I went through, it'll all be worth it.
Yep.
And so, it's funny because you reminded me when my daughter was 18 months and I finally went to my doctor, and I sat on the little bed waiting for her to get there. And as soon as she walked into the appointment, I burst into tears and I was like, I need help. And I remember her saying to me, the only thing you're going to regret about taking an antidepressant is that you didn't come here a year ago, right? Or didn't come here sooner. And I always thought about that too, which was like, God, why did it take so long for me to get to here, right? Oh, God, I'm so emotional. But like that same reel of like, God, if only I could have helped somebody connect the dots sooner, right?
Yes.
And really get that feeling of like, God, you really reach out at the minute you think you need help. Why do we wait until we are at our absolute wit's end?
Because we all do that thing that you said where we go, well, if we wait until like they'll be sleeping more, or they'll be, there's always any number of reasons that things are hard, and it's like maybe things are just hard and they don't have to be. Like, hear me out. What if we deserved more? And then we went and got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. God, absolutely. All right. I want to be. I feel like I could talk to you for 3 more hours, Emily. But I really,
Me too.
I want. I'm so grateful to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights. How can people find you online? And I guess, people don't really work with you, but let's say a little bit more about Climb Out of the Darkness and PSI and how
Yes.
if somebody
Okay,
has a newborn and she's listening to this podcast and struggling, what should she do?
okay, if you have a newborn and are struggling, go to postpartum.net. That's PSI's website. There are plenty of different ways that you can get access to people that can help. You can text, you can call, you can send like a message just through the website, and people will like reach out to you. There's also a national maternal mental health hotline. I will make sure that I get you that number. I don't have it memorized so that you can put it into the show notes.
I think it's on the website, but yes, I will put it in the show notes. That's a good idea.
And that's like live human voice 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they do texting. So if you don't want to say it out loud, but you can type it, you can text instead. And they are the people on that hotline and the people on PSI's helpline both are like warm, fuzzy, most people with lived experience who like know that you're actually pretty normal, even though you might be feeling like you're a monster and you're not normal. You are normal right now. So yeah, go to PSI's website. If you want to learn more about the climb, PSI Climb Out is our like social media handle on all the, we're on all the things. We're not on TikTok because I don't have capacity for that. And I am setting a healthy boundary. And then the I Am One podcast is, I'm looking.
I'll put links to
I Am
all of
One
it.
podcast
Is the
on all
Instagram.
social
Yeah,
media.
yeah. And I'll put a link to it to the actual podcast too in the show notes. It's fantastic. You and your
Thank
co-host
you,
Danny
thank you.
are wonderful, and it's such a great resource.
She is like the yin to my brain's yang. And I think like all of us neurodivergent folks really need to have like coworkers and friends and family members that like provide that balance. Like I was the one that was like, let's launch the podcast tomorrow. And she was like, how about we have a plan? Which I think is why we work so well together.
You know, I always joke that I actually launched this podcast before I was officially diagnosed because I couldn't not. And there was this part of me that was like, "Oh crap, what if I'm not ADHD?" And now I look back and I'm like, "Oh my God, just that alone is so clearly the signs were there all along." But like
Right?
just that doubt of like, "Oh no, what have I done if I accidentally started this podcast and it turns out I don't have it?" I'm like, that is the most ADHD thing possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Emily, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. And it's
Thank
been
you.
such a thrill to meet you and hear your story. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. It's so important to tell these stories, and I think it's you're doing a lot for a lot of us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for making me cry so much today.
Sorry. Not sorry. I don't know.
I know, right? Whew. That was great. Thank you so much.